So here's a little public service announcement for you LS swappers. This is a 49 Chevy pickup, getting close to finishing up swap on. Basically got the fuel system plumbed and computer hooked up, ready to fire it up, and lo and behold, this thing had been setting for about, I don't know, 5-6 years, who knows how long. I knew it had been a long time, so I already was, I knew the injectors were going to be questionable, and every one of them was gummed up to the point that they would not click, fire, nothing. Zero fuel through them. We tested, I actually pulled the fuel rail up, had basically the bottom of water bottles stuck underneath each one just to see if any were leaking. Because if you get one that hangs open, if it's sticky like this and it hangs open, it'll fill the cylinder full of fuel, and then when you go to crank it, it will bend the rod. So we ended up taking all the injectors out. We boiled them in a little bit of soapy water, used a little injector pigtail, just hooked it up to a 12-volt power source after they'd boiled for a while. Used some, carburetor cleaner and some air pressure, got them to flow through where they're all clicking nice. We cleaned out the filter screen on the inlet, and then even after we hooked it back up, we put fuel pressure back to it, verified they were holding pressure at the time. I cranked the engine over just to make sure they were all spraying in the cups. We kind of monitored that, and then number 2 cylinder over here, or number 1 cylinder, excuse me, hung open. It just stayed open, stayed spraying, and luckily we still had the fuel rail out and it was in a cup, and we noticed it. Hooked our little injector pigtail back up and cycled it a few times and got it to quit spraying. But in the meantime, over the next few days, starting it, because these injectors are still kind of questionable, I'm going to monitor fuel pressure, and if I see it drop off quickly, this is probably after about an hour of sitting, so I feel like they're holding pretty well. But if it dumps off quickly like it did that first time, I'd say when one was stuck, it went from 50 pounds down to 20 in 30 seconds or less. It dumped pretty quick. But if it does dump off like that again, I'm gonna crank it over by hand, just by putting a ratchet or something right on the crank. Crank it over 2 revolutions. If it'll turn 2 revolutions without any major restriction, then you can pretty much bet your cylinders aren't full of fuel and you'll save your rods. So just something to think about, especially if you got an engine you're putting in something that's been sitting for a while. Another kind of LS pro tip: if you know it might be a while before you're going to get to the swap, when you pull the engine out of the donor, cap these off. It could just be like a plastic cap, or go ahead and buy the adapters to fit both of these 3/8 and 5/16. Aeromotive makes one that threads on that is pretty foolproof. It won't cause a fire later on. Go ahead and thread those on, put an AN cap on both of them so they don't dry out, because when those injectors dry out, they gum up, they get gummy, and they'll cause you to bend your rod or break a piston or something like that. Like I said, and then after you do get it running, watch it closely for a while. Make sure you don't have one leaking down. Save those rods.